You wake up in the year 35,000 BC. The first thing you feel isn't the cozy warmth of a soft blanket, but the biting cold that sinks into your bare skin and chills you to the bone. Your eyes open slowly, adjusting to the near-total darkness of the cave where you spent the night. The ground beneath you isn't a comfy mattress, but cold, uneven stone, covered only by a few animal skins you hunted and prepared with your own rough, injured hands. The air is thick with a harsh, suffocating mix of burned wood smoke, rancid animal fat, weeks-old human sweat, no baths, and something deeper, more primal. The smell of raw survival, no perfumes, no soaps, nothing to hide the harsh reality of life. Every breath reminds you that you're battling the wild just to see the next sunrise. Your hands reach out, searching for warmth, but find only cold stone, and maybe the sleeping bodies of other tribe members piled together like animals, sharing every inch of body heat. There's no privacy, no personal space, no comfort. Survival is a team effort, where every bit of warmth is precious and shared. You rise slowly, every joint protesting the movement. Your muscles are stiff, not just from the cold, but from the non-stop, brutal labor that fills every hour of your day. No weekends, no holidays, no coffee breaks. From the moment you wake up until you collapse exhausted again on this same cold rock, every second is dedicated to one goal. Don't die today. The faint light coming through the cave entrance reveals a harsh, unforgiving world outside. You hear the wind howling through the trees, carrying the promise of more cold, more danger, more challenges that will push you to your limits. There's no weather forecast to warn you about storms. No heated shelters to run to when nature turns violent. You only have this damp, dark cave. And even it's not truly yours, you have to fight bears, wolves, and other predators that also want this refuge. Your stomach tightens with deep, relentless hunger. Not the kind of hunger from skipping breakfast or waiting too long for lunch. This is the hunger of someone who doesn't know when or where the next meal will come. It wears down your energy and strength. It forces you to make desperate choices. You can feel your body fat burning away overnight, leaving you thinner, weaker, closer to the thin line between life and death. The day's first challenge is simple but could kill you. Make fire. Without it, you can't warm your numb body. Without it, you can't cook whatever food you find. Without it, you can't keep away the predators lurking at the cave entrance at night, waiting for you to slip up. Your hands shake, not just from cold, but from the pressure of knowing one mistake could mean a slow, painful death by hypothermia. You pick up 2 pieces of flint with careful, practiced movements, each motion sharpened through years of trial and error. No matches to strike, no lighters to flick. Just you, 2 stones, and the hope that skill and luck will create sparks. Each strike produces only a few weak embers that quickly die in the cave's cold, damp air. You keep trying, your fingers growing numb with every failure. Finally, after what feels like forever, a tiny spark catches on the dry tinder you carefully prepared the night before. Small bits of dry moss, thin twigs, and bark you collected over days, kept safe from moisture like precious treasures. You blow gently on the spark, bringing your mouth so close to the tinder you can feel faint warmth on your frozen face. The spark bursts into a small, flickering flame, fragile as life itself, and you keep feeding it with obsessive care until, at last, you have a real, crackling, comforting fire. Its warmth is more than just heat. It's life, safety, hope. You press as close as you dare to the flames, letting the heat soak into your skin and loosen your stiff muscles. For these few precious minutes, you can relax a little, knowing you have light to spot threats and warmth to keep your body working. But this small comfort comes with constant awareness. The fire must be kept alive, fed, protected. If it goes out, you have to go through the painful process all over again. Now that you have fire, you think about food. No fridge to open, no pantry to raid, no delivery service to call. Just the wild, dangerous world outside, full of creatures that want to eat you, not be eaten. You have to leave the cave's relative safety and step into a place where you're both hunter and hunted. You check your weapons. Simple spears carved from sharpened branches hardened in fire, stones tied with animal sinews to make crude axes, basic traps woven from sticks and natural cords. Each tool represents hours of careful work, testing, fixing, and adjusting. No stores to buy better gear if these break. No manuals or videos to learn new tricks. Just trial and error, watching animal behavior, and oral traditions passed down by the tribe elders. Those few who survived long enough to gain wisdom. Before you leave the cave, you decide what survival strategy to try today. You might go after big game, mammoths, bison, or wild cattle that could feed the whole tribe for days but come with huge risks. An injured mammoth could stomp you to death in an instant. And if the hunt works, you'll have to compete with wolves, bears, hyenas, and big cats for the leftovers. Saber-toothed cats are interested too, armed with claws and teeth, while you only have crude tools and your wits. Or you might focus on gathering plants, fruits, roots, insects, and small animals. This is safer but takes more time and is less certain. You have to know which plants are safe and which are poisonous. One wrong choice could mean a painful death or serious illness. You have to know where to find these plants each season, how to prepare them, and how to store them for hard times. Each season brings its own challenges and chances, and knowing when and where to be can mean the difference between a full meal and coming back empty-handed. The rain that started overnight has turned the ground into slippery, dangerous mud. Every step outside the cave is a careful dance over unstable ground. There are no shoes to protect your feet from sharp rocks, thorns, or slick spots. Your feet are tough from years of walking rough terrain, but they're still vulnerable to cuts, punctures, or sprains that could put you out of action. A twisted ankle isn't just a hassle. It could be a death sentence. In a world where staying mobile means staying alive, you move cautiously through the thick forest, all your senses on high alert, your ears strained to catch any sound that might mean predators or prey. The snap of a branch might signal a big herbivore nearby, a chance to hunt. The rustling leaves might warn of a predator that sees you as its next meal. Even silence can be scary, hinting that other animals have sensed danger you haven't noticed yet. Your eyes scan the area, looking for signs of animals, edible plants, fresh water, useful materials, or threats. You've learned to read tracks in the mud like an open book, figuring out how old they are, how big the creature was, which way it was going, and how fast. Fresh bear tracks mean it's time to change direction fast. Deer tracks might lead you to water and a possible hunt. The air's smell gives you important info too. You can pick up the musky scent of big plant eaters, the sharp stench of predators, the sweet smell of ripe fruit, or the nasty odor of rotting carcasses that might attract dangerous scavengers. Your survival depends on picking up and understanding these clues faster and better than the other animals around you. After hours of careful tracking, you finally spot promising signs. Fresh boar tracks heading toward a nearby clearing. Boars are dangerous prey with sharp tusks and fierce tempers, but they also offer plenty of meat, fat, and hide that your tribe badly needs. You slow down, controlling your breathing to stay quiet, and position yourself downwind so the boar can't smell you. When you spot it, your heart races, not from excitement but from focused fear. This animal weighs almost as much as you. Its tusks can tear through flesh like butter, and it won't go down without a fight. You have only a simple spear and maybe a couple of stones to throw. Miss your first shot and the boar will charge full speed, dropping your chances of survival. You wait, muscles tense, cold sweat mixing with the rain on your face, until the boar is in the right spot. Then, in a sudden move honed by years of practice and instinct, you throw your spear with all your strength. The spear flies through the air, and for a heart-stopping moment, your fate, and your tribe's, rests on that single throw. The spear hits the boar's side, but doesn't kill it. The animal roars, wild eyes flashing, tusks bared. You have seconds to decide. Run and lose your spear and prize, or fight back with stones and raw strength. The hunger in your gut and the weight of responsibility push you forward. You grab a heavy rock and get ready for the day's toughest fight. The boar charges, hooves pounding the muddy ground beneath your bare feet. You dodge at the last second, using a tree as cover, and smash the boar's skull with your rock. The impact shakes your arms, but the boar's only stunned and lunges again. You dodge and strike in a deadly dance lasting terrifying minutes. Finally, luck, skill, and desperation combine, and you land a finishing blow. The boar collapses, its breathing slowing until it stops. You stand there trembling, not just from cold, but from relief and exhaustion. You didn't kill for sport, but because your life and your tribe's depended on it. There's no time to feel sorry or reflect, only raw gratitude that today you eat instead of being eaten. Now you face the tough task of hauling your prize back to the cave. The boar is heavy, and you have to drag it for kilometers over rough terrain, all while staying alert for predators drawn by the smell of blood. Wolves, bears, and other carnivores might try to steal your hard-earned meal, and you'll have little strength left to fight them off. After the fight, you tie the boar's legs with sinew cords and start the slow, exhausting job of dragging it through the forest. Every meter is a battle against mud, gravity, and fatigue. Your hands get raw from rough ropes. Your muscles scream, and your breathing becomes ragged. But you keep going, knowing this meet could mean life or death for your people. As you struggle, other sounds remind you that you're not alone. Tribe members are spread across the land, each facing their own dangers. Some dig roots and plants from the cold, hard earth with bare hands and simple tools. Others stand still for hours in icy rivers, spearing fish, hoping one swims close enough. The tribe's women face their own risks. They're responsible not just for gathering plants and preparing food, but also for having and protecting children. A pregnant woman works almost until labor, collecting supplies to keep her family alive. When the time comes, there's no hospital, no doctor, no anesthesia, and no guarantee she or her baby will survive. Birth happens in the cold, dark cave, attended only by other women who learned from experience and tradition. Kids who survive those early years don't get a normal childhood. They start helping the tribe survive at a young age, knowing which plants are safe, making simple tools, spotting dangers. A 5-year-old already knows that a moment's carelessness can mean death, by predator, accident, or getting lost in the huge forest. There are no schools, no toys, no carefree play, only the harsh, non-stop lessons of survival. When you finally drag the boar back to the cave, you're met with eager, hopeful faces. Everyone knows this kill means more than just a meal. It means days of relative food security. But the job is far from over. The animal has to be processed right away before the meat spoils. There's no fridge, no preservatives. The butchering has to be quick and efficient, nothing wasted. The meat is sliced into thin strips to dry over fire or sun, making a simple jerky that can last weeks if stored right. The fat is rendered and stored in containers made from animal stomachs, fuel for energy-starved bodies during tough winters. Bones are cracked open to get the nutritious marrow and then shaped into tools, needles, and spear points. The hide is carefully taken off and tanned through a long, tough process of scraping, treating with natural substances, and drying. It will become clothes, blankets, cords, or water pouches. Even sinews are saved for sewing, tying tools, or setting traps. Teeth and tusks get turned into ornaments, cutting tools, or projectile points. Literally, every part of the animal has a vital use. Throughout this work, the tribe moves with silent, efficient teamwork. Everyone knows their role, perfected through years of practice and necessity. The elders oversee everything, teaching the younger ones by example and gentle guidance. There's no room for fights or petty drama when everyone's survival depends on total cooperation. As the work goes on, tension in the tribe slowly eases. The promise of fresh meat and full bellies for days brings real relief. Quiet conversations start. Stories of the hunt, observations about animals, plans for where to look for food next. These are rare moments when the tribe can let their guard down a bit against death. But even in these brief breaks, the harsh reality stays. Everyone knows this meal, as big as it is only a temporary break from constant hunger. In a few days, someone will have to head back into the dangerous forest to find more food, and they might not be so lucky next time. Night falls, bringing new threats and challenges. The temperature drops as the sun sinks behind the mountains, and cold becomes just as deadly as any predator. You gather around the fire, feeding it constantly with wood collected during the day. The fire has to stay burning all night. It's your only protection against freezing cold and predators circling the cave entrance. Outside, the night comes alive with distant wolf howls, occasional roars of big cats, and the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush. These aren't the peaceful sounds of a nature documentary. They're constant reminders that you're surrounded by creatures who see you as food. Your ears stay sharp, even as you try to rest, picking up every noise to decide if it means immediate danger. Sleep, when it finally comes, isn't the deep, refreshing rest you know now. It's a half-conscious state where part of your mind stays alert. You wake several times during the night, sometimes from the biting cold, sometimes from suspicious sounds outside, sometimes from the discomfort of hard stone under you. Each time, panic hits as you check if you're safe or need to spring into action. Now picture waking from a deep, cozy sleep in your soft, heated bed. Clean, dry sheets wrap you in perfect comfort. No bugs biting your skin, no smell of smoke or rancid fat, no stones pressing into your back. The air is clean and warm, held steady at just the right temperature. You get up and walk to your kitchen, where you simply open a fridge and find fresh, safe food. No need to head into the wild armed with primitive tools. No need to risk your life facing dangerous animals. Food is just there, preserved by technology, safe to eat, plentiful and varied. You can pick from dozens of options, each prepared and packaged by people who specialize in this work. Clean drinking water flows freely from taps in your home. You don't have to walk miles to a possibly contaminated river. You don't have to boil water over a fire you made yourself. You don't have to worry about waterborne illnesses. It's simply clean, abundant, and always available with the turn of a handle. The temperature in your home is controlled by a simple thermostat. No need to gather wood, build a fire, or worry about it going out overnight and leaving you freezing. The temperature stays steady and comfortable without any effort from you. You can even adjust the heat or AC in different rooms, making your space perfectly suited to your preferences. When you get sick, there are hospitals with trained doctors, advanced equipment, effective medicines, and treatments that cure conditions that would have been death sentences to a caveman. A simple infection that might have killed someone 35,000 years ago can now be cured with a few days of antibiotics. A wound that could cause deadly septicemia can be cleaned, stitched, and fully healed in weeks. Your clothes are made from soft, durable materials, sewn by machines with a precision no hand could match. They keep you warm in winter and cool in summer. They protect your skin from the elements and can be easily washed and dried when dirty. You have multiple sets, so you always have clean, appropriate clothes for any situation. Your shoes protect your feet from sharp rocks, thorns, hot or cold ground, and give you grip on slippery surfaces. You can walk miles in comfort without worrying about cuts, punctures, or injuries that could leave you helpless. Your feet stay dry, warm, and protected no matter the weather. The sense of security you feel in your modern life is something a caveman couldn't even imagine. You don't need to sleep with a spear by your bed. You don't have to constantly watch for predators lurking nearby. You don't worry that leaving your home might mean never coming back. You live in a society with laws, police, emergency medical services, and infrastructure designed to protect and support your life. But maybe the biggest difference is the luxury of time. A caveman spent every waking moment on the basic task of staying alive, finding food, keeping warm, avoiding predators, tending wounds, and preparing for changing seasons. There was no time for deep thinking, artistic creativity, formal schooling, or any of the thousands of activities that fill our modern lives with meaning and enjoyment. You have time now to read books, watch movies, or learn new skills just for fun. You can travel to far-off places simply to see what they're like. You can build deep relationships based on emotional connection rather than just survival. You can dedicate yourself to hobbies, sports, art, music, philosophy, intellectual and emotional luxuries that would have been impossible when every moment was about basic survival. Your family relationships are built on love and choice, not just practical necessity. You can have kids knowing they'll most likely grow up, have opportunities for education and growth, and choose their own paths, not just inherit their parents' struggle to survive. You can grow old knowing medical care and social support are there, instead of hoping your body stays strong enough to keep contributing to the tribe. Even your modern problems and stresses, real and tough as they are, exist within a context of basic security our ancestors couldn't have imagined. You might worry about work deadlines, complicated relationships, money decisions, or health issues, but you do it knowing there's a social safety net, support systems, resources, and options that simply didn't exist back then. The anxiety you feel about the future happens in a warm bed, with a full stomach, surrounded by people who care about you. You live in a society that has built complex systems to support and protect its members. It's a different kind of worry, one that, while real, happens within abundance and security our caveman ancestors could only dream about. And yet, there's something about cavemen that we have to recognize and respect. Despite their brutal lives, they developed resilience, teamwork, creativity, and courage that not only helped them survive, but laid the foundation for all human civilization. They faced each day knowing death was always possible, but still chose to keep going, to fight, care for each other, and pass on their knowledge. Every tool they made, every hunting method they figured out, every survival skill they improved was a step in the long journey that led to the comforts and security you enjoy today. They didn't know they were part of something bigger. They just did what they had to do to survive another day, care for their families, and keep their tribes alive through deadly seasons. Their ability to find hope and even moments of joy in such harsh conditions shows the core strength of the human spirit. They created art on cave walls. They developed rituals and traditions that gave meaning to their lives. They told stories around the fire that kept important memories alive and taught valuable lessons. Even amid constant struggle, they found ways to express their humanity and build meaningful bonds. When you think about your own challenges, stressful jobs, tricky relationships, money worries, health concerns, fears about the future, it helps to remember you're dealing with these from a place of strength and security most of human history never knew. You have resources, options, support, and time to think through solutions that just didn't exist before. That doesn't make your struggles any less real, but it offers a perspective that can help you face them with more calm and confidence. You come from people who survived impossible conditions with only their smarts, willpower, and cooperation. That strength is still in you. But now you have the added advantage of living in a world that has multiplied your capabilities and options many times over. But the story of cavemen isn't finished. They faced challenges far beyond just finding food and shelter. There were extreme seasonal changes that could turn a fairly nice environment into a deadly desert. Within weeks, there could be conflicts with other tribes fighting over the same scarce resources. There were mysterious diseases that could wipe out entire groups without warning. Seasons weren't just predictable changes in weather. They were radical shifts that forced tribes to completely reorganize their lives. When fall came, everyone knew the next months would be a desperate race to gather enough resources to survive winter. There were no supermarkets to stock up on food, no heating systems to keep homes warm, no manufactured clothes to protect against the cold. Preparing for winter meant ramping up hunting and gathering. Every animal killed had to be processed with maximum care. Meat was dried and stored, fat preserved in makeshift containers, bones cracked to get every bit of marrow. Women worked tirelessly gathering nuts, roots, fruits, and any edible plants that could be dried and kept. Small children collected dry branches, leaves, moss, anything that could be used as fuel during the long, dark months ahead. But even with all that preparation, there were no guarantees. A harsh winter could last weeks longer than expected, using up all the carefully stored supplies. A snowstorm could trap you inside the cave for days without hunting. An avalanche could block the entrance, turning the cave into a frozen tomb. You could do everything right and still die simply because nature was harsher than usual that year. During winter, the cave became an icy prison where dozens had to live packed tightly together. The smell of unwashed bodies, rotting food, constant smoke and waste made the air suffocating, testing not just bodies but minds. Personal conflicts that might have been ignored in busier months turned into serious threats to the tribe's unity. The near-constant darkness wasn't just annoying. It took a heavy psychological toll, affecting moods, energy, and clear thinking. With no electric light, the only illumination came from the central fire and a few torches made from branches soaked in animal fat. These weak, flickering lights cast dancing shadows on the walls, tricking tired, stressed people into seeing dangers that weren't really there. Winter cold wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a deadly force attacking every exposed part of your body. Fingers and toes turned numb and white, threatened by frostbite that could mean losing digits or even whole limbs. Your breath formed clouds of vapor that froze in your beard and hair. The freezing air burned your lungs with every inhale, and each exhale stole precious heat from your body. Food during winter was a constant source of stress and worry. Supplies had to be carefully rationed, with everyone getting only the bare minimum to survive. That meant constant hunger, rumbling stomachs, obsessive dreams of plenty, and the harsh reality that the weakest, especially elders and young kids, might not make it to spring. Every meal was a reminder of how little food was left for the rest of the season. Diseases spread fast in the cave's cramped, dirty conditions. A simple cold could turn into deadly pneumonia. Small cuts could become infected and fatal. Dental problems could lead to facial infections that caused agonizing death. There were no antibiotics, painkillers, surgeries, or real medical care, just basic herbal remedies and hope. You watched loved ones slowly waste away, suffering unbearable pain, powerless to do anything but try to keep them warm and comfortable in their last days. When someone died in winter, the frozen ground made burial impossible. Bodies were left outside the cave to freeze instantly, a constant, grim reminder of death haunting everyone. Hungry predators, drawn by the smell of decay, lurked ever closer, adding another layer of danger. The stench of rot mixed with all the other cave smells, creating a heavy, despairing atmosphere. But maybe the worst part of winter was the mental toll. People who were brave and capable in warmer months became depressed, anxious, and irrational when trapped inside all winter. Small disagreements blew up into fights. Relationships that worked fine during busy times broke down under constant closeness and scarcity. Some simply gave up, stopped eating, stopped caring for themselves, letting depression and despair take them faster than any predator or illness. Then, after months of suffering, came the most dangerous time of all, the end of winter and the start of spring. Ironically, this is when most people died, weak from malnutrition and inactivity, suddenly expected to handle the physical demands of foraging. Many didn't have the strength to make the switch and collapsed, dying when they should have been celebrating. For those who survived, spring was like being born again. The first warm days brought relief and a burst of hope and energy that revived the whole tribe. You could finally leave the cave without fearing freezing to death. You could bathe in thawing rivers and breathe fresh air no longer heavy with smoke and confinement. Finding food was still tough at first. Animals were weak from winter, plants just starting to grow. But there was a feeling of endless possibility, a sharp contrast to the suffocating despair of winter. Each day brought new chances, signs of life returning, and fresh hope that maybe this year the tribe would not only survive, but thrive. During spring and summer, when food was more plentiful and life less harsh, the tribe could focus on more than just survival. It was then they developed new tools, improved hunting methods, explored new lands, and took part in what we'd now call art, religion, and culture. Cave paintings weren't just decoration. They were complex communication systems. Maps of hunting grounds, records of important events, expressions of deep spiritual beliefs. Each drawing took hours of careful work using natural pigments from plants, minerals, even animal blood. These paintings were like visual libraries, preserving vital knowledge for future generations. Rituals and ceremonies during times of relative plenty weren't empty superstitions but sophisticated ways to keep the tribe together, pass on vital knowledge, and cope with the trauma of constant survival struggles. Ritual dances around the fire taught young people hunting skills, simulated dangerous situations safely, and built strong social bonds crucial for surviving the harsh winters. Stories told at nightly gatherings were more than entertainment. They were oral lessons preserving navigation skills, plant and animal knowledge, survival tips, and warnings from past mistakes. A well-told tale about a hunter who died ignoring danger signs could save lives for generations, embedding crucial knowledge in an engaging way. Yet, even in these better times, violence was always there. Not just nature's violence, but fights between humans over scarce resources. Meetings with other tribes could lead to trade or deadly battles where defeat meant extinction. These tribal wars were nothing like modern warfare with rules or protection for civilians. They were about survival, win or die out. Every adult man was both hunter and warrior. Every hunting tool was a potential weapon. Women also had to be ready to fight to protect themselves and their kids. Children learned early to spot signs of danger from other people and react fast, either by running or fighting. Warfare was brutally practical. Surprise attacks at dawn when enemies were vulnerable, using the land to set deadly ambushes. Scorched earth tactics to destroy rivals' resources. Psychological intimidation through brutal violence to discourage future attacks. There was no idea of honorable war or treating enemies humanely. Only the cold math of survival. Maybe the most disturbing part of caveman life was how it shaped ideas of human value and morality. When resources were so scarce that one person's survival meant another's death, decisions we now find morally impossible became necessary. A baby born with disabilities that meant it couldn't survive or help the tribe might be left to die. Not out of cruelty, but because keeping it alive threatened others' lives. Elderly people who couldn't contribute faced harsh choices. Some chose to leave the tribe in winter to die alone rather than use up precious resources. Others were simply abandoned when the tribe moved on. There were no retirement plans, long-term care, or universal human rights. Just the harsh reality of calories versus productivity. Pregnant women faced huge risks throughout pregnancy and childbirth. Any complication that kept a woman from working was seen as a threat to the tribe's survival. There was no prenatal care, no proper nutrition, and no clean, safe place for delivery. Infant and maternal death rates were so high that having multiple kids survive to adulthood was considered incredibly lucky. And yet, despite these hardships, remarkable acts of compassion, sacrifice, and mutual care regularly emerged. Experienced hunters shared what they knew with beginners, even if it meant more competition for food. Strong tribe members carried the injured over long distances, even when it put everyone at risk. Mothers adopted orphans, even when they struggled to feed their own children. These acts of kindness weren't based on abstract morals or ethics. They were practical understandings that long-term survival depended on keeping the community tight-knit and cooperative. A tribe that cared for its members and kept its strongest people around. A group known for abandoning the weak would find even the strong looking elsewhere for protection. But developing these early social rules meant lots of trial and error, and many experiments ended in disaster. Tribes that were too generous could be wiped out by more aggressive neighbors. Groups that became too harsh inside would break apart and destroy themselves. Finding the right balance between cooperation and competition, generosity and self-preservation, was literally a life-or-death challenge worked out over thousands of years. Leadership in these tribes was complex and always changing. There were no crowns, elections, or formal governments. Leaders emerged naturally, based on proven skill, personal charisma, and the ability to make fast, smart decisions under pressure. The best hunter in summer might be replaced by a better strategist during conflict with another tribe. This constant change created instability but made sure the most capable people led when it counted. There was no tolerance for bad or corrupt leaders. Everyone's survival depended on good decisions. Leaders who made bad calls lost followers, who then rallied behind stronger leaders. But this tough merit system also meant no one, leaders included, ever had job security. Today, you might be the tribe's best hunter. Tomorrow, an injury or mistake could turn you into a burden others might consider leaving behind. There were no pensions, disability insurance, or safety nets. Your place in the tribe was always up for reassessment based on how useful you were to survival. Women faced unique challenges beyond the common dangers everyone dealt with. Besides gathering food, making tools, and defending the tribe, they carried the added burden of pregnancy, childbirth, and childcare under conditions we now see as impossible. A pregnant woman had to keep collecting food, processing materials, and helping the tribe almost right up to delivery. When it was time to give birth, there were no hospitals, doctors, anesthesia, or medical gear. Birth happened in the cold, dark cave, helped only by other women who learned through experience and oral tradition. Complications easily fixed today, like breech births, heavy bleeding, or infections, often meant the death of mother and baby. And even when babies were born safely, the challenges didn't end. Newborns were extremely vulnerable to harsh tribal life. There was no formula if breastfeeding failed, no disposable diapers, no heated cribs, no sterile spaces. Babies often died from exposure, malnutrition, disease, or simply because they couldn't survive those extreme conditions. Mothers who lost infants had no time or space to grieve. The tribe's survival meant they had to return immediately to critical tasks like food gathering. Grief was something they handled privately while still pulling their weight in the community. This need to bury emotions and keep going through trauma left deep psychological scars that shaped the tribe's social life and affected the children who made it through. Childhood was a harsh, fast-track education in survival. No schools, no toys, no carefree play. From a young age, kids were gradually given adult responsibilities. First watching, then helping with simple jobs, then taking on full duties much earlier than we'd consider normal today. A 5-year-old already knew how to spot poisonous plants, notice predator signs, stay quiet during hunts, and help gather firewood or prepare food. A 10-year-old was expected to hunt, forage long distances, and help defend the tribe. There was no adolescence as a slow transition. You were a kid until you were an adult, and that switch could happen overnight based on what the tribe needed. This forced maturity made survivors incredibly skilled at surviving, but also left them with deep wounds from a childhood lost too soon. There was no therapy, counseling, or mental health concepts. Traumas were processed through tribal rituals, shared stories, and the need to keep functioning despite inner struggles. Now imagine waking up in your cozy bed, in a warm room, knowing there's plenty of food waiting in the kitchen. Imagine knowing your kids go to safe schools where they learn not just survival, but art, music, literature, science, and countless other subjects that open their minds and futures. Imagine living in a world where injuries and illness can be treated by trained professionals with advanced medicines and technology. Imagine having free time to read, watch movies, follow hobbies, and build relationships based on connection and love, not just survival. Imagine traveling far away just to see new places, without worrying about predators, starvation, or never coming back home. Imagine living in a world where the elderly are cared for and respected, instead of being abandoned when they become a burden. Where children with disabilities receive specialized care instead of being left to die. Where women give birth in clean, safe hospitals with professional medical support. Where conflicts between groups are settled through negotiation and laws instead of all-out violence. Instead of war, picture educational systems that let you learn about the world without having to figure everything out through potentially deadly experiences. Communication networks that connect you to the knowledge and wisdom of millions. Transportation systems that let you cross continents in hours instead of never finishing your journey. Your modern concerns, work stress, complicated relationships, financial decisions, health issues, all happen within a context of security and plenty that would have been unimaginable to a caveman. You can worry about these things knowing there's a social safety net, plenty of options, and resources to tackle most problems. Even when life gets tough, you enjoy luxuries our ancestors only dreamed of. The luxury of time to think through solutions. The luxury of asking for help without becoming a burden to your community. The luxury to make mistakes and learn from them without risking your life or the lives of those who depend on you. And maybe, most importantly, you have real hope. A caveman could hope tomorrow would be better than today, But that hope was often just wishful thinking. The odds were that tomorrow would be just as dangerous, or worse. Your hope is based on real systems, proven progress, and real chances for improvement. When you lie down in bed tonight, take a moment to feel gratitude. Not just for the obvious comforts in your life, but for the deep security and possibilities you often take for granted. You live in a world where you can dream, plan, create, love, and explore in ways that were impossible for most of human history. But there's still more about caveman life worth thinking about. Consider how they handled injuries and illnesses with none of the medical care we take for granted today. When someone got hurt, maybe cut by a sharp stone or attacked by an animal during a hunt, there were no ambulances, no hospitals, no surgeons to treat complex wounds. A deep cut on the arm, which today would get a few stitches and antibiotics, could easily turn into a deadly infection, eating away the flesh over weeks. The injured person had to watch their wound rot, suffer fever, and endure unbearable pain with no real relief, while family helplessly watched, knowing these were likely their loved ones' last days. Broken bones were even worse. A broken leg, which today would be set with a cast and healed through physical therapy, was often a death sentence for a caveman. Without proper immobilization, bones healed badly or not at all. The person became permanently disabled, unable to hunt, gather, or defend themselves. In a society where everyone had to contribute, becoming a burden could mean death. Medical treatments were based on limited observation, oral traditions, and often superstition. Herbs and plants were used as remedies, but without scientific knowledge of active ingredients or correct doses. A plant that eased minor pain could be deadly if taken too much. Treatments that helped one person could kill another due to allergies or metabolism. Pain was a constant, harsh companion. There was no aspirin for headaches, no anesthesia for painful procedures, no medicine for chronic pain, arthritis, back problems, dental pain, or infected wounds. People lived for years with excruciating pain that today would be easy to treat, forced to keep functioning and helping the tribe despite their suffering. Dental problems were especially scary. With no toothbrush, toothpaste, floss, or dentists, cavities were unavoidable and progressive. A toothache could turn into a painful abscess causing facial swelling, fever, and death from infection. Teeth were often lost from infection or broken chewing tough food, leaving people with trouble eating properly. Personal hygiene was almost non-existent. There was no soap, shampoo, deodorant, or cleaning products. Baths were rare and only possible if you found unfrozen, clean water not controlled by predators. In winter, bathing was basically impossible, meaning people could go months without washing properly. This wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Skin infections, parasites, and diseases spread easily. Lice, fleas, mites, and other pests were constant, causing itching, irritation, and spreading illness. No effective treatments existed, so people just learned to live with the discomfort. Hair became tangled, greasy, and full of debris, parasites, and smells. Without tools to cut or style hair, it grew wild or was torn out or burned when it got too bad. Fingernails and toenails grew long and dirty, collecting dirt, blood, and decomposing material that bred bacteria and infection. Human waste was another unpleasant reality. There were no toilets, toilet paper, or sanitation systems. People went wherever they could, using leaves, moss, or their hands to clean. In winter, when leaving the cave was dangerous, waste built up inside living areas, creating terrible sanitation that spread disease and pests. The smell of a caveman tribe would be unbearable by today's standards. Unwashed bodies, dirty clothes, human and animal waste, rotting food, constant smoke, blood from hunts and injuries, and the sickly sweet stench of death. all mixing to create an odor that would make anyone used to modern cleanliness physically sick. But beyond the obvious physical hardships, there were psychological challenges in caveman life that were just as tough. Living so close to death gave people a completely different outlook on life than we have today. You woke up every morning knowing this could literally be your last day alive, not some distant possibility, but a real and immediate threat. That constant awareness of mortality shaped how people formed relationships, made decisions, and found meaning. There was no time for holding grudges, complicated dramas, or hesitation when your life could end at any moment. Every interaction with another person carried a weight and urgency that's hard to imagine in our safe modern world. Romantic and family relationships were influenced as much by survival needs as by love. Marriages were often practical arrangements combining resources, skills, and tribal alliances. Romantic love, as we understand it today, was a luxury few could afford when every choice of partner had direct consequences for the whole family's survival. Women had little control over when or with whom they had children. There was no birth control, sexual education, or reproductive choice. Pregnancy was simply what happened after sex, and each pregnancy brought huge risks for both mother and baby. Women might have 10 or more pregnancies in their lifetime, with maybe only 2 or 3 kids surviving to adulthood. Men faced different but equally intense pressures. They were judged mainly by their ability to provide food and protection. A man who couldn't hunt well, fight when needed, or contribute to the tribe's survival quickly lost status and might be abandoned or kicked out. There were no social programs to help men who didn't fulfill these roles. Kids growing up in this environment developed a tough mindset that would be seen as traumatic today, but was necessary for survival. They regularly witnessed violent death, took part in butchering animals from a young age, and faced the harshest parts of life with no protection or shielding. This early exposure created adults who were incredibly resilient, but carried deep emotional scars. There was no concept of trauma, therapy, or mental health. They just learned to suppress painful feelings and keep going, no matter how much they suffered inside. Language back then was primitive compared to the rich communication we have today. Tribes had limited vocabularies focused on immediate survival. Words for animals, plants, tools, weather, and dangers. Abstract ideas like philosophy, art, or intellectual curiosity didn't exist because there was no time or energy for anything that didn't help survival directly. This limited language also made it hard to express or understand complex emotions. There were no words for depression, anxiety, trauma, or many psychological states we recognize now. People felt these emotions but had no way to talk about or make sense of them. Childhood education was totally practical and survival-focused. There were no schools, no toys, no time for just playing. Kids learned the skills they needed to help the tribe survive. Hunting, gathering, making tools, spotting danger, and basic medicine. They learned by watching, copying, and practicing under supervision, not through formal lessons or theories. A kid learned to hunt by tagging along with experienced hunters and slowly taking on more responsibility. They learned about plants by watching gatherers tell the difference between edible and poisonous species. There were no books, no schools, no lesson plans. Spiritual beliefs were shaped by constant exposure to overwhelming natural forces. There was no science to explain storms, disease, or hunting luck. Everything, from thunder to sickness to hunting success, was blamed on supernatural powers that needed to be appeased or controlled through rituals. These rituals often required big sacrifices, burning precious food as offerings, fasting for days, self-inflicted pain, or deliberately putting oneself in danger. People risked their lives performing ceremonies hoping it would improve their chances, creating a complex and often harmful relationship with their beliefs. Art was closely tied to survival needs. Cave paintings weren't just decoration, they were maps of hunting grounds, calendars for seasons, records of important events, and ways to communicate visually. There was no idea of art for art's sake. Every creative act had to serve a practical purpose for the tribe's survival. Music and dance helped coordinate group efforts, share vital info, and keep social bonds strong. During tough times, songs helped hunters move quietly together, send danger signals across distances, and preserve critical knowledge about navigation and resource locations. Migration was a constant reality for many tribes, forced to keep moving in search of food, water, and better weather. These moves weren't vacations or explorations. They were desperate journeys where whole families risked starvation, dehydration, exposure, or predator attacks. Every decision about when and where to go could mean life or death for the tribe. During these migrations, people had to carry all their belongings, tools, weapons, food, kids, and sick or injured members. There were no vehicles or pack animals. They walked long distances over rough terrain, often malnourished or hurt. Navigation depended on watching the stars, recognizing landmarks, and oral stories about routes from earlier generations. Getting lost meant almost certain death, so leaders had enormous pressure to make the right calls on where to go. Now, compare that harsh existence to the life you live today. When you wake up in the morning, you don't have to immediately wonder if predators are lurking outside your door. You don't need to check if you have enough food to survive another day. You're not forced to make life or death decisions for your family. If you make the wrong choice, your home is a cozy and safe sanctuary that a caveman could never have imagined. Sturdy walls that keep out wind, rain, snow, and predators. Temperature control that keeps you comfortable no matter the weather outside. Clean water flowing freely from multiple taps. Food stored in refrigerators and pantries that provide balanced nutrition for weeks or even months. Your healthcare system is a marvel of technology and science. Injuries that would have been fatal back then are healed routinely in days or weeks. Diseases that once wiped out entire tribes are now prevented with simple vaccines or cured with readily available medicine. Complex surgeries fix injuries that would have been permanent disabilities in the past. Your personal hygiene is easily maintained with products and systems that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors. You can clean yourself thoroughly every day with hot, plentiful water, effective soaps, and specialized tools. Your teeth stay healthy through methods and products that prevent most dental problems that used to plague people. Your relationships are based on choice, compatibility, and mutual affection, not just survival. You can take into account personality, shared interests, and emotional connection when choosing a partner. You decide if and when to have children, thanks to reproductive technologies that give you control over one of life's most fundamental aspects. Your education covers not only practical skills but also history, art, science, literature, philosophy, and hundreds of other fields that broaden your understanding of the world and your place in it. You can spend years learning and exploring ideas without worrying that it threatens your survival. You have instant access to all human knowledge through the internet. Questions that once might have taken a lifetime to answer, or might never have been answered, can now be researched and understood in minutes. You learn from billions of others' experiences and discoveries without having to risk fatal trial and error yourself. Your ability to move around is incredible compared to our ancestors. You can travel thousands of miles in hours, visiting places a caveman couldn't even dream of. You can explore different cultures, landscapes, and experiences just for fun or curiosity, with little risk to your safety. Your problems and worries happen within a foundation of security that lets you tackle them thoughtfully and with plenty of resources. Even when facing real hardships, health problems, money troubles, complicated relationships, you have options, support systems, and time to find solutions that didn't exist back then. You can experience complex emotions like nostalgia, artistic passion, intellectual curiosity, and idealized love, because your basic survival needs are so well met that you have mental and emotional energy left for richer experiences. And maybe most amazing of all, you can look back and appreciate the incredible journey humanity has taken since those brutal days in the caves. You can feel connected to and grateful for the ancestors who endured impossible conditions and paved the way for the civilization that makes your comfortable and secure life possible. Tonight, as you lay your head down, surrounded by warmth, safety, and the promise of a new day full of possibilities, take a moment to quietly marvel at humanity's incredible journey and the extraordinarily privileged place you hold in it. A place that marks the difference between relative comfort and certain death. Back then, without precise ways to measure time, life flowed in a totally different rhythm. There were no appointments, deadlines, or schedules. But that didn't mean freedom. Quite the opposite. Every moment was ruled by the need to survive. You slept when darkness made it dangerous to stay active. You woke when daylight made it safe enough to leave the cave. You ate when you found food. You worked constantly because stopping meant dying. This lack of time structure also shaped how people thought. There was no long-term planning like we know today. You couldn't dream of a comfortable retirement, plan a career, or set life goals decades ahead. The furthest future you could think about was maybe the next season, and even that was uncertain. This very different way of seeing time created a kind of intense focus that's hard to imagine now. Every decision was made with immediate, often deadly consequences. There was no luxury of procrastination, indecision, or long thinking. When a predator appeared, you had seconds to react. When a hunting chance came up, you had to act fast or lose it. When the weather changed dangerously, you had to move right away or suffer the consequences. Communication within caveman tribes was limited not just by a simple vocabulary but also by the constant need to stay quiet. Most of the time, especially during hunts or when predators were nearby, survival depended on communicating through gestures, facial expressions, and barely noticeable visual signals. Developing these silent ways of communicating took years of practice and close bonds among tribe members. Imagine trying to coordinate a complicated hunt with several people, traps, and perfect timing, all without speaking out loud or making any noise that might scare off prey or attract predators. Every hand movement had to clearly convey important info about direction, speed, danger, or strategy. One misunderstood gesture could mean losing the prey, serious injury, or even death for someone in the hunting party. This heavy reliance on nonverbal communication also created incredibly deep social bonds. When your survival depended on instantly understanding others' intentions and feelings without words, you built a connection far beyond what we usually experience in today's word-heavy world. When it came to choosing mates and forming pair bonds back then, the factors were brutally practical by today's standards. Physical attraction mattered, but it came second to things like hunting skills, stamina, survival abilities, and strong genetics for healthy offspring. A woman who picked a partner just based on feelings could literally be choosing between life and death for herself and her future kids. Men didn't compete by showing off wealth, social status, or smarts. They competed by proving their survival skills. The best hunter, the most skilled toolmaker, or the bravest tribe defender were the ones who got to reproduce. There was no place for charm or social games when every day tested your ability to survive. Women were judged not only on their ability to have children, but also on how well they could gather food, prepare it, make clothes and tools, know medicinal plants, and handle the tough demands of tribal life. A woman who couldn't pull her weight was a burden most men couldn't afford. This created relationships that were both brutally honest and intense. There was no room for pretending, mind games, or romantic illusions. You knew exactly what your partner was capable of because your life depended on it. This clear-cut honesty built both deep intimacy and constant tension. Pregnancy back then was a totally different experience from what we know now. There were no pregnancy tests to confirm early on, no prenatal care to monitor mother and baby, and no knowledge of proper nutrition during pregnancy. A woman just noticed changes in her body and hoped for the best, all while continuing to do the physically demanding work needed for the tribe's survival. She had to keep gathering food, processing materials, and helping out almost up to the moment of giving birth. There was no maternity leave, no rest, and no easing of responsibilities. If a pregnant woman couldn't fully contribute, she risked being abandoned or kicked out. Giving birth was terrifying, and many women didn't survive without medical knowledge, sterilized tools, or surgery. Complications that are easy to handle today often meant death for both mother and baby back then. Problems like difficult baby positioning, heavy bleeding, infections, or long labor could all be fatal. The women assisting birth only had oral traditions and limited experience to guide them. They might try to reposition the baby, press to stop bleeding, or use herbs they believed helped, but it was mostly guesswork with lives on the line. For babies who survived birth, the first years were incredibly risky. There was no formula if breastfeeding failed, no diapers for hygiene, and no medicine for common infections or illnesses. Babies often died from malnutrition, exposure, respiratory diseases, or simply because their tiny bodies couldn't handle the harsh tribal conditions. Infant mortality was so high that parents had to protect themselves emotionally by not forming deep bonds with newborns right away. Many primitive cultures didn't consider babies full tribe members until they survived a certain amount of time, maybe 6 months to a year. This emotional guard helped parents keep going despite losing children regularly. For the kids who made it through those tough early years, learning was total immersion into adult life. There was no idea of a protected childhood or slow development. 4 or 5-year-olds already watched and copied complex adult tasks. They learned about death, violence, sex, and all the harsh realities of life because they couldn't be shielded from them in small, shared living spaces. This early exposure made kids unusually mature and skilled for their age, but also left them with psychological wounds they didn't have the words or tools to process. A 6-year-old might know how to track predators but also have witnessed the violent deaths of siblings, friends, or even parents, with no way to talk about it. Play did exist, but was very limited and always linked to practical survival skills. Kids played hunting games using small versions of real weapons. They practiced hiding from predators through games that mimicked life or death situations. They competed to build strength, speed, and coordination needed for adult survival. There were no toys just for fun or imagination. Anything that took time and effort to make had to serve a practical survival purpose. Dolls, if they existed, were used to teach childcare skills. Games always involved skills needed for adult life. The social hierarchy within caveman tribes was fluid but harsh. Status was based solely on proven competence in activities that kept the tribe alive. A skilled hunter might have a lot of influence when meat was scarce, but lose all status if he got injured and couldn't help out. A woman with special knowledge of medicinal plants might be valued during epidemics, but ignored when her skills weren't needed. This extreme meritocracy meant there was no social safety net or guaranteed spot for anyone. Even recognized tribal leaders could be abandoned or challenged if their decisions led to failure or death. Leadership was a heavy responsibility with few perks but huge consequences for mistakes. Elders in these societies faced a tough reality once their bodies couldn't keep up, and they no longer contributed effectively to the tribe's survival. They became burdens the community often couldn't afford. Some chose to walk off into the wilderness to die with dignity rather than drain precious resources. But elders who stayed useful through specialized knowledge, tool-making skills, or survival wisdom could keep respected roles in the tribe. They were living libraries of vital information, carrying decades of survival experience that could save lives during crises. Passing down knowledge across generations was informal but intense. There were no schools, books, or formal education. Everything a person needed to survive had to be learned by watching, copying, and hands-on practice. This meant losing experienced people could devastate the tribe, wiping out decades of knowledge in hours. Stories told around the fire weren't just entertainment. They were complex ways to preserve essential info. A story about a hunter who died from ignoring danger signs could save lives for generations. Tales about seasonal resources worked like mental maps guiding survival. Myths and legends encoded navigation, plant ID, and survival techniques in memorable ways. But oral transmission was vulnerable. Details could be forgotten, misunderstood, or changed over time. A small change in survival advice could mean death. Elders who told these stories carried a huge responsibility. They were the guardians of life-saving knowledge. Geography and navigation back then relied entirely on natural landmarks, stars, and memory. There were no maps, compasses, or coordinates. A tribe might know an area of about 100 square kilometers intimately. Beyond that, it was unknown and full of dangers. Trips into unfamiliar lands were risky missions that could lead to the whole tribe getting lost and dying of hunger or thirst. Tribal navigators memorized complex sequences of landmarks, tracked animal migration, and read subtle clues in plants and rocks to find their way. During migrations, the pressure on these navigators was intense. One wrong turn could lead the tribe into dangerous predator territory, places without enough resources, or just into the unknown where everyone would die. There was no GPS to fix mistakes, no way to call for help, and no rescue if things went wrong. Climate was a major factor controlling nearly every part of life. Seasonal changes weren't just a matter of changing clothes, they transformed the environment completely, turning once livable areas into deadly deserts or fertile lands into icy wastelands. Tribes had to be extremely sensitive to subtle climate signs that warned of big changes. Changes in animal behavior, wind patterns, or the color of the sky could all be crucial warnings that dangerous weather was coming. Missing these signs could mean being caught in deadly storms without shelter. Preparing for extreme weather meant planning months ahead, gathering materials to reinforce shelters, collecting enough fuel to keep fires going through long storms, and storing food to last weeks. If hunting became impossible, these were huge efforts demanding lots of time and energy. But even with careful preparation, severe storms, cold snaps, or droughts could overwhelm the tribe's capacity. There were no emergency services, no evacuation shelters, no outside help. There was only what the tribe could build and gather, and often that just wasn't enough. Discovering and controlling fire was one of humanity's most important achievements. But back then, keeping fire going was a constant and terrifying task. There were no matches, lighters, or quick ways to start fires. Once a fire was lit, it had to be tended constantly, protected from wind and rain, fed with the right fuel, and carefully watched by tribe members. Letting the fire go out could mean death for the whole tribe. Without fire, there was no warmth, no protection from night predators, no way to cook possibly contaminated meat, and no light for work after dark. Restarting a fire using primitive methods could take hours or days of hard work. Time the tribe often didn't have. The responsibility of keeping the fire alive was shared among several tribe members, but there was always a lot of anxiety about what might happen if everyone messed up at the same time. Heavy rain, strong winds, or just carelessness could easily put out the tribe's lifeline. Some members stayed awake in shifts all night, not just to watch for predators but to make sure the fire never went out. Collecting fuel was a daily chore that took hours. Dry wood had to be found, cut into the right sizes, and stored somewhere safe from moisture. When the weather was wet, finding enough dry wood to keep the fire going was almost impossible. The tribe had to develop ways to dry wood artificially, preserve flammable materials, and ration fuel when supplies ran low. Different kinds of wood burned differently. Some gave off more heat or smoke and were better for certain uses. Wood for cooking had to burn hot and clean. Wood for heating overnight needed to burn slow and steady. Wood for signaling or scaring off predators had to produce thick, visible smoke. Learning all these details took years of experience and careful watching. Making tools back then was a complicated craft that literally meant the difference between life and death. Every tool had to be handmade from natural materials using techniques developed through risky trial and error over generations. A poorly made spear could break during a critical hunt, leaving the hunter vulnerable to dangerous animals. A faulty trap meant going hungry. The materials had to be gathered, processed, and prepared through tough and sometimes dangerous methods. Flint for spear tips and knives had to be mined from specific spots, often in dangerous areas controlled by predators or hostile tribes. Wood good for handles only grew under certain conditions and had to be cut, dried, and shaped through processes that took weeks. Animal tendons used to tie stone points to wooden shafts had to be taken from fresh carcasses, cleaned, and carefully processed to make strong, lasting ropes. This process was gross, time-consuming, and needed perfect timing. If tendons were left too long before processing, they became useless. Metallurgy wasn't known yet, so all cutting tools had to be made from flint. Creating sharp edges by chipping flint was an amazing skill that took years to master. One slip could ruin hours of work, waste precious materials, or even cause serious injury from flying sharp flakes. But even the best tools didn't last forever. Spear points broke during hunts. Cutting edges got dull after repeated use. Wooden handles cracked under pressure. Tendon ropes weakened from moisture and age. Tribe members had to constantly make, fix, and replace tools, which took huge amounts of time and energy. Hunting wasn't just about finding and killing animals. It was a complex task that needed strategic planning, team coordination, a deep understanding of animal behavior, and a willingness to take big risks. Large animals like mammoths or bison could feed the whole tribe for weeks, but could easily kill hunters with a stomp or gore. Hunting tactics had to be adjusted depending on the animal, terrain, and weather. Hunting migrating reindeer required very different strategies than hunting a lone bear in its cave. Ambushes in dense forests worked differently than hunts in open plains. Every situation required on-the-spot decisions based on years of experience. Coordination among hunters during a big hunt had to happen without talking, so as not to alert the prey. Each hunter needed to know their role, timing, and responsibilities perfectly. A hunter moving too soon could scare the prey away before others were ready. Hesitating at the crucial moment could let a wounded, dangerous animal escape and attack the team. Hunting was always risky. Wounded animals often became more dangerous. attacking anything they saw as a threat. Hunters could be trampled, gored, bitten, scratched, or crushed by dying animals. Injuries were often fatal because there was no medical care. Even after a successful hunt, new challenges arose. The animal's carcass had to be processed fast before the meat spoiled or attracted predators. The whole animal had to be carried back to the tribe's camp, sometimes across difficult terrain for miles. This required big coordination and left hunters vulnerable to attacks on the way back. Gathering plants, fruits, nuts, and other plant foods was just as complex and dangerous. Knowing which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous took special knowledge that meant life or death. Many poisonous plants looked a lot like edible ones, and a mistake could lead to painful poisoning and death. Knowledge about plants had to be constantly updated with the seasons, location, and environmental changes that affected safety and nutrition. A plant safe in one season might be toxic in another. Plants growing in one area could be completely different when found in different soil or climate. Timing was crucial too. Fruits and nuts had to be picked at peak ripeness. Too early, and they didn't have enough nutrients. Too late, and they'd spoil or be eaten by animals. Roots needed digging when they had the most stored carbs. Processing plant foods for long-term storage involved advanced methods developed through generations of trial and error. Drying, fermenting, and other preservation techniques had to be done just right to prevent spoilage and harmful fungi or bacteria. Poorly preserved food could cause serious illness or death by food poisoning. Resource management back then required careful planning and serious discipline. There were no credit systems, savings, or insurance to fall back on during hard times. The tribe's entire survival depended on stockpiling resources when times were good to get through unpredictable periods of scarcity. Deciding how much to use right away versus how much to save was a constant, stressful balancing act. Using too much too fast left the tribe vulnerable in emergencies. Saving too much meant dealing with unnecessary hunger right now. There were no data, economic models, or forecasts to guide these choices. Just experience, gut feeling, and hope. Storing preserved food meant constant protection against pests, spoilage, and theft by other tribes or animals. Food caches had to be hidden, stored carefully, and regularly checked to make sure they were still good. Finding out stored supplies had spoiled or been stolen during a crisis could mean death for the whole tribe. Now, picture yourself waking up in your cozy bed in a perfectly heated room, knowing there's plenty of safe food waiting in your kitchen. Imagine clean water flowing freely from multiple taps in your home. Imagine wearing soft, clean clothes and shoes that protect your feet, living with heating at the push of a button. Imagine a world where injuries and illnesses are treated by trained doctors with advanced tools and medicines, where kids go to safe schools and learn not just survival skills but art, music, science, and hundreds of other subjects that broaden their minds and futures. Imagine having free time to read, watch movies, enjoy hobbies, and build relationships based on love and compatibility, not just survival. Imagine traveling to faraway places just to see what they're like, without worrying about predators, hunger, or never making it back home. Imagine living in a society where elders are cared for and respected, where children with disabilities get specialized help, where women give birth in clean, safe hospitals, and where conflicts are settled by laws and negotiation instead of violence. Imagine having instant access to the combined knowledge of all human history through the internet. Imagine learning from the experiences of billions of others without risking fatal trial and error yourself. Your modern worries, work stress, complicated relationships, money choices, health issues, exist in a foundation of security our ancestors couldn't even imagine. You can face these problems knowing you have a social safety net, many options and resources to handle most challenges before you go to bed tonight. Take a moment to feel deep gratitude, not just for the obvious comforts, but for the fundamental security and opportunities you consider normal. You live in a world where you can dream, plan, create, love, and explore in ways that were impossible for most of human history. Still, there's something to admire about cavemen. Despite their harsh lives, they developed resilience, teamwork, creativity, and courage that not only helped them survive, but laid the groundwork for all the human progress that made your comfort possible. Every tool they made, every technique they learned, every survival strategy they honed was a small step on the long path to the safe and comfortable world you live in today. They didn't know they were part of a bigger story. They just did what they had to do to survive another day. May this thought bring you peace and gratitude. As you gently drift to sleep, surrounded by the comfort and security our brave ancestors made possible through their relentless endurance and determination, remember that you live in a world shaped by their fight against disease and death. But there are parts of their lives that challenge our modern understanding. For example, diseases weren't just minor annoyances treatable by a doctor's visit. They were terrifying forces that could wipe out an entire tribe in days, with no warning, no explanation, and no hope of cure. A simple cold, which today we treat with rest and over-the-counter meds, could spread like wildfire, killing the young, the old, and anyone weakened by malnutrition or injury. Without any concept of germs, contagion, or hygiene, tribes had no way to stop disease spread besides abandoning the sick or fleeing infected areas. Tuberculosis, now treatable with antibiotics, was back then a slow, painful death lasting months or years. Victims coughed blood, lost weight fast, and wasted away, while the tribe watched helplessly. There were no sanatoriums, no treatments, no understanding of how disease spread. Families had to watch loved ones die slowly, knowing they might be next. Infections we now cure with antibiotics often became deadly septic cases. A simple cut could get infected, turn gangrenous, spread through the body, causing unbearable pain and inevitable death. There were no surgeries to amputate infected limbs, no meds to fight infections, no sterilization or infection control. Stomach and intestinal diseases caused by bad food or water were especially deadly. Severe diarrhea and vomiting could dehydrate someone to death in days, with no rehydration solutions, IV fluids, or anti-diarrheal meds. Tribes just watched family members waste away and die. Mental illnesses were completely misunderstood and often blamed on spirits, curses, or divine punishment. People with severe depression, schizophrenia, or other disorders were often abandoned, kicked out, or even killed because they were seen as supernatural threats or unbearable burdens. There were no concepts of mental illness, treatment options, therapy, or psychiatric medications. Epilepsy was especially frightening to primitive tribes because the seizures seemed like clear signs of demonic possession or supernatural forces at work. People with epilepsy were often feared, sometimes revered, as having special connections to the spirit world, or simply abandoned because their seizures were thought to be contagious or cursed. When the bubonic plague finally spread to human populations through infected fleas, it was literally apocalyptic for tribes with no natural immunity or understanding of how the disease spread. Entire tribes were wiped out in just a few weeks, leaving only scattered skeletons in abandoned caves as silent reminders of lives cut brutally short. Even health problems we now consider minor could be deadly. A severe toothache could turn into an abscess that spread to the brain, causing death by meningitis. Broken bones that weren't properly set could get infected and lead to fatal blood poisoning. Burns could become infected and cause death by septic shock. Primitive medical attempts were often more dangerous than the illnesses themselves. Cutting someone with sharp stones to release bad humors often caused more blood loss and infection than relief. Tree panning, drilling holes in the skull to let out evil spirits, had nearly a 100% death rate. Medicinal herbs were often poisonous or given in deadly doses. Death was such an ever-present reality that tribes developed complicated, often conflicting attitudes toward it. On one hand, there was a fatalistic acceptance. Death could come at any moment for any reason, so worrying too much was pointless. On the other hand, there was constant fear and obsessive caution against every possible cause of death. Death rituals combined practical and spiritual needs. Bodies had to be removed quickly to avoid attracting predators or spreading disease. But there was also a psychological need to honor the dead and process the trauma of losing so many loved ones. In winter, when the ground was too frozen to dig graves, corpses were often stored in separate cave chambers, serving as constant visible reminders of mortality. Conflicts between caveman tribes were far from civilized disputes with rules or efforts to minimize casualties. They were brutal fights for survival, where losing meant total destruction. Death for every man, woman, child, and elder. There were no ideas of human rights, rules of war, or humane treatment of prisoners. Tribal wars were often sparked by competition for scarce resources. Hunting grounds, clean water, shelter, or materials for making tools. When resources were plentiful, tribes might coexist peacefully or trade. But in times of scarcity, violent conflict was often the only alternative to starvation and death. War strategies were ruthless and aimed at eliminating rival tribes as threats. Surprise dawn attacks when enemies were vulnerable. Using fire to drive them from caves into ambushes. Poisoning water sources with toxic plants or rotting carcasses. Weapons of war were the same tools used for hunting. Spears, stone axes, clubs, and throwing stones became tools of tribal genocide. There were no specialized weapons for war versus hunting. Violence was simply redirected from animals to humans, using the same primitive technology. Combat in tribal conflicts was up close and brutal. There were no long-range weapons. Every fight was hand-to-hand. Warriors could see their enemies' eyes as they killed them, hear their screams, and feel blood splatter on their own skin as they delivered fatal blows. Women and children from defeated tribes faced fates decided by the victor's customs. Some were killed immediately to prevent future revenge. Others were captured and forced to join the winning tribe, often suffering extreme trauma and losing their former identities. Small children might be adopted, but older kids who remembered their families were often seen as long-term threats. Psychological preparation for war involved rituals that dehumanized the enemy and readied warriors for extreme violence. War dances, body painting with blood or intimidating colors, and ceremonies calling for spiritual protection or blessings to kill. These helped warriors overcome natural reluctance to kill humans and enter the mental state needed for brutal violence. After battle, trauma was dealt with through tribal rituals and stories that justified the violence as necessary for survival. There were no ideas of PTSD, therapy, or mental health treatment. Warriors who developed mental problems after combat were often seen as weak, cursed, or unfit for tribal life. The impact of war went beyond the fighting itself. Tribes that lost many in battle became vulnerable to future attacks, lacking enough people to defend themselves or do essential survival work. Victory could gain resources but also created deep grudges lasting generations, increasing chances of revenge attacks. Spiritual beliefs during this time were deeply shaped by constant exposure to uncontrollable natural forces and ever-present death, with no science to explain what was happening. Everything, from storms to sickness to hunting success, was seen as controlled by supernatural forces that had to be understood, appeased, or controlled. Early religions were animistic, believing animals, plants, stones, rivers, mountains, and other natural things had spirits or consciousness. These spirits were thought to have personalities, desires, and the power to help or harm humans depending on how they were treated. Complex rituals evolved to communicate with these spirits and influence their decisions. Shamans, or spiritual healers, held special roles as go-betweens for humans and the spirit world. They interpreted supernatural signs, performed ceremonies to ensure successful hunts, healed illnesses with spiritual methods, and communicated with ancestors' spirits. This was a powerful but demanding role. Failure in spiritual duties could lead to blame for any disaster that happened. Spiritual rituals often involved significant sacrifices, precious food burned as offerings, long periods of fasting, ritual self-harm, or intentionally putting themselves in danger. People literally risked their lives performing ceremonies they hoped would improve their chances of survival. It's a tragic irony that rituals meant to protect life often ended in death. Rites of passage marked major transitions in tribal life: birth, coming of age, marriage, death, and served important social roles by defining responsibilities, building community bonds, and establishing social order. But these rites often included dangerous physical challenges that tested courage, endurance, and dedication to tribal traditions. Young people's initiation into adulthood often involved brutal trials that could cause serious injury or even death. Ritual scarification, exposure to poisons, pain endurance tests, or surviving alone in harsh environments. These rituals separated capable adults from dependent children but also eliminated those judged unfit for adult tribal life. Dreams were seen as real spiritual experiences where people could receive messages from spirits, visit other worlds, or gain prophetic insight into future events. Dream interpretation was a specialized skill that could influence major tribal decisions about migration, warfare, or survival. Bad dreams were often seen as warnings of upcoming disasters that required action. Funeral rituals were complex and varied based on the deceased's status, cause of death, and tribal beliefs about the afterlife. Some bodies were buried with tools and food for use in the next life. Others were cremated to release the spirit. Some were left exposed to the elements to be consumed by wild animals, returning the body to nature. Spiritual practices also included using psychoactive plants or fungi to induce altered states of consciousness during ceremonies, allowing communication with spirits or prophetic visions. But these substances were extremely dangerous. Incorrect doses could cause poisoning, permanent psychological damage, or death. The cave art they created wasn't just decoration. It was a complex system of spiritual communication. Animal paintings were often paired with abstract symbols representing spirits, natural forces, or important myths. These paintings served as primitive temples, where rituals were performed and spiritual knowledge passed down. Seasonal changes weren't just predictable weather shifts requiring different clothes. They were radical, often deadly transformations that could turn livable areas into icy deserts within weeks. The ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to these changes was literally a matter of life or death. Autumn was a time of frantic preparation and growing anxiety. Every tribe member knew the next few months would be a desperate race to gather enough resources to survive the winter. There were no grocery stores to stockpile food, no heating systems to keep the indoors warm, and no manufactured clothes for extreme cold. Hunting ramped up dramatically as tribes raced to kill and process as many animals as possible before migration or hibernation. This meant longer, riskier hunts, sometimes going after animals they'd normally avoid because getting preserved meat was more important than safety. Gathering plants also became an obsession. Fruits, roots, and other edible plants had to be collected in huge amounts and processed to last through winter. Whole tribes spread out over vast areas, working from dawn to dusk to find and prepare every edible plant before the cold destroyed it. Preserving food for winter required complex techniques developed over generations of trial and error. Meat was sliced thin and dried over sun or fire to make jerky that could last months. Animal fat was rendered and stored in makeshift containers. Plants were dried, fermented, or processed to prevent spoilage. But even with careful prep, there was no guarantee that stored food would last until spring. A particularly long winter could drain supplies weeks before hunting and gathering could start again. Finding out stored food had spoiled or been eaten by pests during a crisis could mean death for the whole tribe. Winter itself was a time of suffocating confinement and constant hardship. Temperatures dropping well below freezing made leaving the cave risky even for basic needs. Sharp winds could cause frostbite in minutes. Deep snow made movement tough, and navigation nearly impossible. Inside the cave, dozens of people had to live cramped together for months. The smell of unwashed bodies, rotting food, smoke, and waste created an almost unbearable atmosphere. Personal conflicts that might be ignored during busier seasons blew up into tensions threatening the tribe's unity. The near-constant darkness had devastating mental effects. With no electric light, the only sources were the central fire and a few animal fat torches. These weak, flickering lights cast dancing shadows that could cause paranoia and hallucinations in people already stressed by confinement and malnutrition. Food was a constant worry. Rations had to be carefully rationed to last until spring, meaning chronic hunger for everyone. Stomachs growled, dreams obsessed over food, and the harsh reality that some weaker tribe members might not survive was always present. Even the arrival of spring brought mixed feelings, relief, but also new dangers. Bodies weakened by months of hunger and inactivity suddenly had to handle the intense physical demands of gathering food again. Many died during this transition simply because they didn't have the energy to adjust from forced rest to hard work. Spring thaw brought its own dangers. Swollen rivers that could sweep people away, deep mud that could trap and drown, and unstable ground that had been frozen solid for months. Tribes had to face these hazards while their bodies were still weak from the winter. The urgent need to find new resources pushed tribes to take on exploratory journeys that were extremely risky and often deadly. There were no maps, GPS, or navigation tools beyond natural landmarks, the stars, and fallible human memory. Exploring unknown lands meant risking getting permanently lost in hostile wilderness, with no resources or clear way back. Deciding when and where to migrate was a group decision that could mean survival or extinction for the whole tribe. Staying put in familiar areas after resources ran out meant slow starvation. Moving into unknown territory offered the chance of new resources, but also huge risks. Death from exposure, predator attacks, or simply getting lost in endless wilderness. Scouts sent ahead to check out new territories faced extreme danger, traveling long distances through unfamiliar lands, often alone or in small groups, carrying as little as possible to move faster. Many scouts never came back, lost to predators, accidents, or deadly disorientation in alien terrain. During migrations, entire tribes had to carry everything they owned: tools, weapons, preserved food, small children, injured or sick members, over distances that could stretch for hundreds of kilometers. This often took weeks or even months, leaving the tribe vulnerable to attacks, harsh weather, and shortages of food or water. Pulling off such massive migrations required strong leadership and strict tribal discipline. Moving large groups through dangerous territory made them easy targets for predators and rival tribes. Keeping the group together, protecting the weakest members, and making the right navigational calls under constant pressure tested every part of tribal life. Migration routes became treasured tribal knowledge, passed down orally through generations. Details about water sources, good hunting grounds, dangerous areas, and threats were all woven into stories, songs, and symbols that served as primitive maps for future travelers.